So I'm going to start off the panel today with a little bit of context setting. So as you guys pull up my slides, we'll walk through this a little bit. The image that you're seeing up here is kind of the iconic image that a lot of people think of when they think of human spaceflight exploration. It has a famous photographer behind the lens, Neil Armstrong, taking a picture of Buzz Aldrin as he's coming down the steps. I'd like to flip the context, which I don't think is all that hard with this audience, of about the way we think about exploration. This had a time and a place that was very accurate for itself, and was obviously very successful in what the mission it wanted to accomplish. However, it wasn't a sustainable way to think about human exploration in the long term. One of the things that people harp on is latest, whatever administration that comes through, the latest quote of objectives and those kind of things. One of the ones I'm throwing up here is April 2010. It's part of the same speech that President Obama rolled out our asteroid and Mars timelines and such. But we're pulling on the section of the quote that I believe is a little more relevant about the discussion that we're talking about. And it's not about going to a certain destination by a specific time frame or even a destination in and of itself. It is about extending humans' reach into space. And I think this is a context that we need to shift the way in the dialogue that we talk about human spaceflight exploration and the way that we utilize space and bring it into our economic sphere regardless of which destinations that we're going to. In addition to that, I was going to pull on the latest strategic plan from NASA. The significance of this is one of the first times that we've ever, in an actual formal NASA document, outlined the expansion of human exploration, and then also mentioning Mars for the first time in one of our strategic plans. But again, it then also focuses first off on this expansion of human presence as a major objective. I'm not going to go through all these strategical principles that we've built up, but one of the things we've been using in our exploration endeavors at NASA is a set of principles to help guide our decision processes and how we come up with the strategies and architecture to expand into space. One of them that we're going to talk about today is really this opportunities for U.S. commercial business and how we're working together, which is the third one from the bottom there. But a lot of these other elements are important aspects as well, but we'll dive into the one related to commercial with our entrepreneur panel today. A lot of this starts with ISS, and you've heard from John and everybody else today, the CASIS team, on building a robust LEO market. That is obviously extremely important. It's also a proof case of how we involve commercial sector and how does this whole transition, actually John laid it out pretty well, of transitioning suborbital research over to commercial and now getting into LEO, transitioning to commercial. But then how do we actually start setting the seeds for what Bill pulled on this morning of this proving ground type activity? And how do we involve the commercial sector from day one and explore the options and trade space that we work with industry together with in this proving ground type of period that we're endeavoring to go into and then moving on. So this is an interesting chart that we've used a few times. It kind of shows this Earth-reliant phase that Bill talked about this morning, talking about the proving ground and talking about the Earth-independent phase. And really, you're also seeing the commercial cargo and commercial crew there, and really there's also the suborbital piece that fits into that as well. And what we want to be able to lay out is how do we involve in a more inclusive way the commercial endeavors and commercial economic return on investments as a kind of a sliding scale. How do we move through this Earth-reliant phase where we started with suborbital and LEO, but then how do we think about the commercial model as we expand into the proving ground and eventually into the Earth-independent stage? I'd love to see an overlay, which we don't have at this point, but this is from the recent Emerging Space report that was just published out of the Office of the Chief Technologist at NASA. And it's an interesting diagram showing the emergence of multiple companies across the space sector by geographic location. To me, there's also an analogy of how do you then map those same companies to this chart as a location space of where those companies are operating and where they're seeing return on investments coming in, starting with the Earth-reliant phase, moving into where we're going in the future. NASA, in recent history, we've been issuing a whole number of RFIs, BAAs, and various different engagement mechanisms to try to figure out with industry what are those next steps. So you see the ones that obviously with commercial cargo and the new commercial cargo contracts, commercial crew, helping enable CASIS and the national lab endeavors that we have there. The asteroid mission BAA, having to figure out through awards that we've done in that, how to figure out the mechanisms and capabilities that we're advancing for the asteroid mission, but how do those relate to commercial industry, and where can we leverage commercial industry to enable the asteroid mission. Our recently announced partnerships through the Lunar Catalyst endeavor, which both of the folks that join me on the stage here are participants in that effort as well. Expanding into the most recent RFIs, the one related to ISS evolution, and then the most recent one being Next Step is on the far right-hand side there, which is actually not released yet, but it's a synopsis we released last week to look at, and it will be a BAA, and it will be coming soon here as the synopsis was released. But we're looking at 3 new capability areas to explore with commercial industry related to advanced propulsion. This is kind of the advanced propulsion that goes beyond what we did under the asteroid mission BAA that we did there. Habitation systems. How do we enable additional small satellite missions as secondary payloads on EM1? There's a lot of potential commercial utilization that could occur with that. And the key attribute of this is we want ideas and concepts that are commercially viable. So what we are putting in a restriction here of 50-50 cost share, which is trying to endeavor to find those things that can be invested in jointly by the government and industry that have a return on investment, and kind of build on that heritage of us and the commercial sector working together. And it was good to have a quick talk right before ours on the difference of entrepreneurship and those entrepreneurship type companies. And I want to have an engaging kind of panel here with yourselves and my colleagues up here on the stage to talk about how the government and entrepreneurs work together, and how that cohesive interaction of iterating together, coming up with different ideas. We know we're never going to get the models correct from day one. So Pat actually chimed on the little bets this morning as kind of our open comments. But how do we make those little bets and we start making progress together through these different things like Catalyst and the suborbital program that's going on with NASA and industry, but then be smart enough to know that we're not going to get it right the first time, and both pivot on the government side and on the commercial side together in a cohesive group. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob to make some introduction comments, and then followed by Sean. So,
sure. Thanks, Jason. So it's always a pleasure to be here with you, Jason, on these panels that talk about private-public partnerships with NASA. So my love affair with the moon began as a boy, as an orphan of Apollo, and I guess it never went away. But it was really seeing the moon as part of the next logical step for humanity, moving into a multi-world species. So to me, my power of 10 is moving the economic sphere of Earth out from where it is at 25,000 miles with geosynchronous satellites and a very mature market out another magnitude to the moon and then beyond. And these orders of 10 also correspond to what's happening in technology, where we live in an exponential world, not a linear world, which is allowing relatively small companies with relatively small amounts of capital to do things that were only capable to be done by superpowers in the past, right? So it's this, there's an incredible inflection point happening to those of us with infinite impatience. The inflection point, we want it to be right now, but it's not. In the context of a power of 10, a decade is okay, right? I mean, when history looks back on it, the inflection point will be now, where the private sector, together with government, permanently moved humanity off the planet into space, to the moon, to Mars, and beyond. And it's a very exciting time to be alive. Moon Express is a Silicon Valley type of company. It's equity investments, so we have money that's come into the company. It was born about 4 years ago, just over 4 years ago in August of 2010. And we're going through successive investment phases, like a software company, where we demonstrate technical progress and milestones to our investors, and they say, good boys, good girls, there's some more money. And we've done pretty well, I think. The order of magnitude that we're talking about to do a small robotic mission to the moon is about $50 million. You know, less than the cost of a bad B-grade Hollywood movie. You know, but still a lot of money because attracting that level of private equity to something that hasn't been done before is still hard. And we're just thrilled to be a partner with NASA now. As a matter of fact, Moon Express couldn't exist without NASA in our various partnerships throughout the years. And we're here to talk to you about how well that's all working today.
Great. Sean?
Good afternoon. My name is Sean Mahoney with Masten Space Systems. The Power of 10 connection is actually the age of Masten Space Systems. The company is actually 10 years old. We're in a different place than some of the other companies. We've taken a very different approach to developing our technology, toward funding our growth. And there are some folks that say, wow, Masten has interest in landing on the moon. That's surprising. Those would be people who perhaps missed the fact that we competed for an X Prize, the Lunar Lander Challenge, 5 years ago. And the business has been, in that period of time, looking for the right opportunity and trying to match up the right market and the right customers and the right time to bring our existing technology base and apply it to a real problem, to a real challenge. And that's why this topic of working with government, if we were doing it just on our own, we would still be doing it just on our own and we wouldn't be talking about it here. But the fact of the matter is there are synergies, and any business school folks will probably be tired of that word, but there's ways that we can definitely work together. For the new entrepreneur that thinks, well, the government is the enemy, they're treating the government as perhaps monolithic and are kind of missing the point. So today, what I'm hopeful we'll be able to tease out a little bit is I can tell you some about what Masten's history was, about how we've worked with government over the span and in different ways over the span of our history, and how we're leveraging existing partnerships today to actually take technology that has already been developed and that we are developing and actually bring value to the market and to the nation.
Okay, so with that, I'm gonna start off with a question for both of you guys related to, it goes back to the little bets. I mean, obviously, we didn't just dive into this with the Catalyst partnerships. You guys have a long track record of working on your own and making technology advancements, but also with the partnership with the government. So I'd like for each of you guys to kind of lay out a little bit of the history as you guys saw it, some of those advantages and why did that work or didn't?
Well, I guess
fair game as well.
It kind of started with, hi, I'm from the private sector and I'm here to help. and NASA said, okay. And it was really a kind of a bootstrapping, mutual respect and discovery of how to work together. In our case, we started out with reimbursable Space Act agreements, so that was an easier sell, which meant we needed to pay NASA for access to facilities, and we got our training wheels on a hover test vehicle that NASA Ames had stood up that eventually became the Common Spacecraft Bus and the LADI vehicle. And progressively, that has now wound up in the Lunar Catalyst program, which is not an exchange of funds yet, but is an exchange of value, real value to us that displaces real costs that we would otherwise have to spend ourselves. I think we're clearly heading towards that, you know, as CEOs we're the chief extraction officers of money from investors. And it would be a good idea that we turn the table around where we're actually getting more money than spending with NASA, but I think we're heading in that direction, where NASA is a partner and a customer and a very collaborative one that's really making a difference to us.
Masten, in the competition for the Lunar Lander Challenge, grew out of a NASA Centennial Challenge. So it's going back to that, it's kind of funny to say that's the midpoint in our history, but NASA played an important role in getting the company out of the initial ideation phase into the, okay, let's actually get something done phase. NASA and working with government as a customer, for example, with the Flight Opportunities Program, was a huge benefit and the existence proof of flight opportunities was a thing that I was able to turn around to the investors and say, look, here's a list of things where we are creating value. And that helped us make that argument that our big idea had some actual value. As we now come around again, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out who in the government has use for the core technology that we have today. And I spent a lot of time just having conversations. And there's a lot of those that didn't go either anywhere or that didn't go well. It was like, great, thanks, not interested. Okay, I'll try the next door over. And so it's to sit here today and talk about the success of Catalyst as it kind of gets started is great. There's a whole lot, and I imagine you probably have the same sort of meetings that led up to this, that it took a while to get there, but NASA in particular has played an important role in helping Masten guide its future. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.
Another question I had was, Bob and I were talking actually in the hallway that there's kind of a difference between entrepreneurial space companies and some other companies, and there's a bit of a difference in the way entrepreneur companies structure themselves and make progress and such. And it would be interesting to understand what industry models do you feel that you guys are following, or where do you get inspiration from? And kind of iterate on that a little bit more about entrepreneurial space is a little bit different, but still trying to get to the same goals that we all are here.
I have not found the perfect analogy yet, and I've tried. Because we do the same thing. We do airlines, we do automotive, we do consumer electronics, we do Silicon Valley. We look to all these different technologies. We look to transportation technologies. None of them have really quite resonated correctly. But I'll tell you the one thing that gives me the most hope, it's the Newton. I keep coming back to that one. I've been using that more. Anyone remember the Apple Newton?
The Newton?
Yeah, a couple, okay. They had this crazy idea of a palm-held computer. They put a computer with a stylus, I believe, and it was a great revolutionary product that completely failed. Why did it fail? Maybe it was too much technology too soon, but maybe they were just too far ahead of the market. So when Newton failed, and Apple failed with it, and Apple stock was going to crash and sell your stock because these guys don't have a chance. Should have bought then. And then someone else looked at that and said, you know what? No, there is something there. And you had Palm that came along and introduced, and then Apple got a chance. Second bite of the apple. I didn't even intend it. But Apple came back later and had a smarter answer. So the reason I like the Newton as a thing to point to is because just because your idea, your product, your service didn't work today doesn't mean that it's wrong. You might need to wait for the next iteration. And the goal for us is to stay around, to stay in the game long enough so that the timing is right.
I think that's an important aspect. It's the perseverance, I guess. So here's a model. It's not perfect. No model is. But when I think of entrepreneurship, and I don't really like the old space, new space. I'd rather call it smart space. The smart spending of money and collaboration in order to reach the goal. Ask yourself, where does the risk lie? Who holds the risk, right? In an entrepreneurial company, the investors will be holding all the risk and envisioning the product coming to a prospective market. On the other side of the spectrum, if it's a cost plus, I won't call it traditional, what would I call it? What's the opposite of smart space?
I knew you were.
I won't go there. All the risk is on the taxpayer, and there's really no risk in the company, right? So you get a different culture with an entrepreneurial company. Yes, sleepless nights, endless dedication, bootstrapping, and nobody will ever know the story of the entrepreneurs, what they actually go through, but it's an all-in scenario. And with uncertain outcomes. And that's okay. And we've done great things in the world through entrepreneurship. And I believe that smart entrepreneurship, and using our partnerships, like has always been the case. If you look at the early days of the Americas and the move west and the gold rush turned moon rush and others, those models persevere today.
So I'd like to get your guys' perspective, I have my own, of the government's role in some of these public-private partnerships and where you guys see where we're doing things in a good way, encouraging this space to grow, but then also where we've gotten some of those little bets that were wrong and we had to pivot and move on to the next thing. It'd be interesting to hear your guys' perspective, and then we'll actually at some point here turn over to audience questions as well, so make sure you guys are sending those up. But we don't always get it right in the government and what that role is, and we've been kind of exploring that space together and what this means, everything from several years ago and moving into commercial cargo and crew and moving into models like Catalyst and moving into, as Bill described, the evolution of what stations as a platform will be over time. There are things that we've done well and things that we haven't, and it would be interesting perspective on where does the industry need that help and where is that value?
You're doing good. Keep doing it.
But we don't know what good is. I mean,
well, so I don't, Sean, I don't know if you share this with your experience, but one of the things that's been very, very useful with the partnerships and the acknowledgments we receive from NASA is that when you go out for capital, and with a huge nod to SpaceX, and for cutting down some jungle that just hadn't been cut down, it's really, really hard to for an investor or a VC to do due diligence on a crazy idea that goes outside the bounds of anything they're experiencing. They like to understand. So when you have a validation that comes in that you can say that, well, you know, NASA's our partner, or we have some contracts, that really helps create the confidence among the investor community, together with examples of successes out there. And then you have some other private companies with a big nod to Google that changes it kind of from a giggle factor to a Google factor, that there's a large private company out there that does care about exploration. Does that?
Yeah, that would resonate. And I would say also there's sometimes a misperception that venture capital money is all about research and creating stuff from new cloth. And I think that's a little bit of a misperception, because a lot of times the venture capital money, to my experience, is interested in scaling something to a market, which is a different phase than certainly where we are, and when you're doing the core technology development on a very risky thing, that can be really tough. But the government, the NASA contracts do certainly lend significant credibility to that. To answer the other side of that, a little difficult, but I'll take a swing at it. What is NASA doing poorly in this making small bets? And honestly, I think the answer would be celebrating failure. We have to be able, the entrepreneur is about quickly making sufficient decisions and keeping your failures small enough that you have since already succeeded in some other area. The idea that, and a great movie line, but not necessarily a great business model of failure is not an option. We need to fail. And most of the people I think in the room appreciate that. We should trumpet those failures. And it is something that is not just a NASA government thing, it is a cultural thing. There are a few places, Silicon Valley is one of them, where you can list the failures that you had as a badge. Years ago,
that's why I'm doing so well, I guess.
Years ago, I was in the kind of startup community around Atlanta, and they had a page that listed all of the companies that were in, ideation phase and were out there. And then there was a failed page. There was one company on the failed page. Now, there were plenty of companies that had failed, but only one person was like, yeah, sure, I'm closing up shop and moving on to the next thing. And so I don't know how you do it, but you asked the question. So if there's a way to talk about the way SBIR investments in a particular thing, not that it failed for process, but it failed for technical reasons, to talk about those things and to share them more publicly will bring down the risk of of technology development, I think, more broadly, and hopefully draw some more people into a willingness to take risks. So.
Yeah, when failure is not an option, success becomes very expensive.
Yeah.
And at one point, Jason, we're going to, those of us who want to send payloads out beyond Earth orbit, payloads, not freeloads, but payloads, and if those payloads happen to be funded through scientists by NASA, we have to go through something called TEMPCO. And there's a cultural, philosophical, and contractual barrier there that we haven't solved yet.
So when you guys are thinking about these failures and such, what do you think the state of collaboration is amongst companies like yourselves? Is there a large amount of collaboration? Does
Yes.
there need to be more? Or?
First of all, Eric, raise your hand again. CSF is a great way for the companies that are trying to change the ground rules and change the way things are done. That CSF is a great way for all of us to kind of go, okay, we may disagree on particular implementations. We may even disagree on what things need to happen. But at least we have a place where we can go and say, hey, yeah, I was thinking about pushing on this thing. Yeah, that's a pain for me too. Great, let's work together on it.
And we cheer everyone's, even if there's a direct competitor, we cheer everyone's success because the rising tide floats all spaceships, right?
It's not Pollyanna, but.
But no, of course, it's not Pollyanna. It's not kumbaya.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a movement. Yeah. And it's great when there's a success. We can all.
And I think the industry is still developing enough that the lines of who has in what sphere isn't entirely drawn yet. So you may, and this is, again, not surprise, you may be a subcontractor to another company on one thing, you may be a direct competitor on another, they may buy something from you. So I think there's an awful lot of that. There's probably more of it going on than is talked about publicly. Where companies are working together, and frankly, if I need a thing, you might be able to sell it to me, and I can use it. Works for you because it's cash to you. I don't have to develop it separately. That's fine. We may not publish that because neither one of us necessarily want everyone to realize that we're working closely together. But I think there's a decent amount of that goes on. At least the phone calls go on.
So I'm going to shift to a couple of audience questions. The first one is interesting, and I think it's a key question that a lot of people have is, what is some of your best methodologies to find investors? And how have you, and I'm paraphrasing here, how have you built that investor network? And that seems, it's a general theme that people struggle with.
We've never compared notes, Sean.
No.
So interesting.
Probably very different. My number one way is don't need them.
Well, does that mean like customer contract is your best type of investor?
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, non-dilutive, non-equity. If I can get a grant, that's best. If a customer and a grant are both in there. Grant is great because someone just gives you money. Don't see a whole lot of that. Customers are even better because then you are demonstrating a need. So the best argument for an investor is I don't need your money. Again. It's a great idea. The simple fact of the matter is you've got to be able to show why they should invest in you. And we have gone through many different business models, still searching. And we've had some success, and I've had plenty of failure in communicating that value. So I don't know. It's a work in progress on my side.
Right. So non-dilutive capital is the best kind usually. But also investors can be good partners, right? Especially strategic ones or ones that are really familiar with how to grow a company and scale and so forth. So, I began my journey looking for money in about 2006. Every good commercial space company, not every good commercial space company, but most want a billionaire behind them of some sorts. And the problem is that most billionaires have their own, right? So find a billionaire. So I was lucky enough to find the only billionaire on the block that didn't have a commercial space company, and Naveen Jain was great. He loved commercial space. And Barney Pell came in as well, and it was great. But it's a long haul, and most of the investors in Moon Express are not VCs, but they're high net worth individuals, people who care passionately about the big picture, and have patient investment, and are looking for the little on ramps and the little successes that say we have revenue models along the way to making the moon part of our economic sphere, which is what the big picture is.
So along with this, obviously with investors comes fundraising, I mean in general, but there's a lot of uncertainty in some of that fundraising sometimes. So one of the questions that came in here is, how do you deal with that budget uncertainty on a yearly basis or in between each funding cycle basis?
Yearly basis, that would be wonderful. Oh my gosh, I would love a quarterly basis.
How do you practically actually deal with that uncertainty of not knowing when new customers will come in or new investment rounds that may come in? How do you make the decision processes to what to invest in next to open up the market?
Just for men, it hides all the gray. No, I'm kidding. The actual specific answer, I'm not sure if there is a strategic question or a tactical one. I track every single dollar that comes into the business from its qualification stage all the way through to the cash is in the bank, and I have double-checked the day after to make sure it was actually there and I wasn't just imagining it. So I break out every single invoice. I track all of those parts and pieces, and our runway varies between holy crap and something that's a little bit longer than that. I mean, so, and I mean that somewhat jokingly. Masten right now has a runway of in these 3 to 6 month range. I know how I will solve that problem after that. I've got to complete some other work, but I actually have more runway in front of me right now, but it's not on a yearly basis. And it's Schrödinger's rocket company. I don't know what's going to happen. I know if I go do something else, that someone else will get the opportunity to come sit up here, that someone else will get a chance to go to the moon, that I know that if we stay at it, we'll find things or we'll react to the realities on the ground. There isn't all of your planning is going to fall apart. No plan survives first contact. So.
And if you take Sean's comment to heart, I think that's really the difference here. So 3 to 6 months is a long runway for an entrepreneurial company to have. 3 to 4 months in Silicon Valley typically is that's where the headlights are. So imagine living with that all the time. Every day you're looking, if you're lucky, 3 or 4 months ahead, you're good. Yeah. What happens after that? You'll have to figure it out. You're jumping out of the airplane, you're finding the parachute on the way down. When you hit the more senior rounds, like let's say the C rounds of investment that we happen to be in that phase right now, then you get to look out 12 and 18 months if you're lucky, and you can actually start to execute on a long-term program. But for those of us who are familiar how phase A, B, C, D, typical space technology development programs happen, imagine having your engineering team have to understand that funding happens to this point, and then we have to find more funding, and to keep the momentum and the excitement together with the fiscal reality that we just don't know where your salary is coming from 5 months ago, or 5 months ago. I'm not going to tell you where it came from 5 months ago, but we don't know where it's coming from 5 months from now.
And Jason, there's another point to that as well, which is for the leadership, if you're considering an entrepreneurial life, that is your job, is to manage cash flow, to make sure, and to worry about it. I often say I deal in conditional futures. I have to figure out which of these things is going to come in and how do I align the workload and everything else. The other piece of that, though, is very, very direct and open with the whole team, but not to the point of having them obsess over, oh crap, where's my paycheck coming from? And we have had disruptions to payroll. The very first thing you do when you know you're not going to be able to pay your engineers is tell your engineers. You don't want them to go to the bank and bounce a check. So be honest with your people, tell them what's going on, and this is not just when you're in crisis mode. There's different models on how to handle this. Our team knows where we are, they get a briefing, they get to see what's going on with the dollars, but their day-to-day is taking concept and turn it into reality. My job is to be a little bit further out, and we have a great pairing on that. So in terms of how do you manage cash flow, just make sure your team knows what they're getting themselves into.
No, this is an interesting discussion, because even at NASA in recent histories and government funding, we don't know how to manage without a CR lately. I think it's kind of the new norm that we operate under. The continuing resolution for those that are unfamiliar with it. Be grateful that you're unfamiliar with it. But we don't have this continuation of, we don't know what next year's budget will bring, even in a large organization like NASA, just because of our funding cycles. We're not on the extreme side that you guys are at, but definitely learning how to actually make the right fundamental investments, regardless of what are some of those things that could happen to you, but doing the right thing and hoping for the budgets that come through to actually support that.
And if we're working with you on that, we're waiting for you to figure out what you're going to have, and then we have to, so we're downstream of that same thing.
And there's time delays in each one of those. So there's a couple of quick questions here. One of them was, is Masten involved with Lunar Catalyst program? That one's a quick yes. The three awardees under Catalyst were Astrobotics, Moon Express, and Masten. That was a quick question that was up there. And there's also a question on the BAA on habitability. Does it include food and water supply type work? That will be released in the BAA, and it will be coming very soon. So I'll leave that one to the more official procurement process. Another general question about, what's your thought about the differences between the fly, fail, learn, and iterate versus the opposed to test to complete risk elimination? And how do you handle that in your companies? And what is your approach specifically? And I think you both have a similar tactic in this, but it'd be
Sounds like it. Our mantra at Moon Express is fail early, fail often. That's kind of a Silicon Valley thing. I add, please try to fail digitally. And because of the level of software and simulation that we have, we have a spacecraft brain that we created a holodeck around it with sensors, and it thinks it's flying around the moon, and we land on the moon 1,000 times a day. But sooner or later, you have to get to hardware, and hardware. Each piece, I don't have to tell you guys, each piece of hardware is not, it has a personality. When you put all that systems engineering together, it even though you've predicted everything, it has a personality, and until you actually build, design, build, test, has been such an important exercise for us to burn down risk. Don't burn it down to design and you have one chance of the hardware. We learned something just last week that I'm glad we learned last week. And if it was attached to our spacecraft, might have been a different story. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And so there's the analysis paralysis versus extinction by instinct. You're balancing those two kind of tensions. But there's some other benefits to the build fly paradigm. One, the obvious ones, if you can't figure some of those things out in SolidWorks, you can't figure out, oh, this is not actually large enough for a human hand to fit through the hole to tighten the bolt. You can simulate yourself silly, but you're not going to get that real world experience. But the other piece that is missed so often in that is you assume then that the end goal of either of those processes is, okay, I have something that works. But someone has to work it. And if the first time you're trying to figure out how to work the thing you've developed is after it has spent years and years and years in simulation, and you haven't matured your operation, then you've got a lot of learning you're going to have to do at a time when your learning of operations will probably be out of sync with your actual development. So the rapid test iteration allows you to develop those operational steps as well. And I think sometimes that gets missed in that question. But yeah, we definitely, we want to fly as often as possible, and I desperately want to make the failures small enough that they are easily recoverable, and it is a delicate game that we continue to play, of trying to figure out how hard do we push and how much do we need to come back and be rational. And we constantly are looking at those processes. It is not a one-way trip towards more and more simulation. It shifts back and forth.
So one of the other questions we had here was, it kind of goes along this failure piece, is how, I mean, unlike the Newton, which seemed to be a graceful failure from the outside, maybe it wasn't actually, how can we actually learn from entrepreneurs how to do this failure in a more graceful way? Is it how do you actually treat that and cause that fail gracefully kind of philosophy within your own organizations? And but then again, Bob just added but please fail digitally. Yeah. Maybe that's part of the answer, but
it helps.
And
but I think, the drama, and Morpheus had a failure, and there was a completely sympathetic reaction to that said, get back, build it again, try again, right? And I think a lot of us have been in this game for a long time, and there are failures, and this is about perseverance and sticking to it and getting there. So in the culture internally in the company, to understand, we have a culture of, don't hide something that you saw was wrong. Open it up, shine the light on it, let's make it better, and be very, very honest with our partners, our customers, and our investors.
Yeah. So it's great advice I gave, and now I'm gonna. So internally, absolutely, you have to celebrate as much as you can. 10 minutes after 0A crashed, we were picking up twisted parts of metal going, I think this is out of spec. We should probably send it back for service. The team bounced back very quickly. And we still had some soul. Don't get me wrong. When you have a large total loss of vehicle failure, that weighs heavy on you. But you have to, as the leader, encourage that discussion of failure. And I mean brutally honest, not, okay, we're docking your pay, but okay, this did not go as planned. How bad is it? What really went wrong? And tell your clients that you're not working with. Those have been some of the most fun phone calls. When I have something that is a failure that causes a time delay, when I have to call another client that I'm not even actively working with and say, hey, by the way, you should know we bent this thing. It's not fun, but it is the right thing to do, to embrace that. I don't ever want anyone in my organization or anyone that I work with to hide a failure because they are afraid of repercussion. So that's the one piece. On the other side, I don't talk as much. Masten used to be a little bit more of an open book. And frankly, not everyone understands the same way that this family does failures. And so I tend to be less public. I will be open with clients, partners, team. If you ask me, I will tell you, but I'm not going to probably post it on the blog, which is a drawback. And that's it. I don't know. It's a tough issue. I don't know how to deal with that, because there are some companies that do, and that's great, but at the same time, we have the reality of managing our perception outside.
So Moon Express has a lot to learn. We're just coming into the vehicle stage right now.
I was going to say, if I'm keeping record of all those that had operational landing test vehicles,
yes.
Yours is coming into operational readiness.
That's right.
And you're the only one that hasn't crashed yet.
Yeah, we have no loss of vehicle yet.
But
just to bring everybody, you might not be familiar with our stage, but we're building our vehicle now. If all goes well, we'll be flying this terrestrial version of our spacecraft down at the shuttle landing facility in partnership with NASA, where Morpheus flies, within 2 months. And these will be the first hardware flights we've had of hardware we've built, or software that we've built. Last year, we were able to fly the Mighty Eagle. Mm-hmm. NASA's hardware was software we built. We took the hardware risk thanks to NASA. That was a great use of capital at the time, because our failure would have been digital. And yeah, well, it landed right side up. It was all good, and it was a great partnership. Now, we're going to be the ones flying in the air with our investment and our asset, and our asset on the line with our investors. So wish us luck, because we're really trying hard to make this work.
Sean, actually, now that Bob actually laid out, what's some of your near-term things that we should be looking for from Masten?
Didn't I just say I don't talk about? So excellent question.
It's a prerogative of the panel leader.
Yes,
here.
I know.
Ask you questions that you don't want to answer.
I will first not answer your question at all by saying that we recently crossed 200 flights on Zombie. So there is a single rocket-powered vehicle that now has flown 200 times. The 201st is happening today, maybe tomorrow. So we're continuing to do work with Zombie. And I'll give you the more general answer of Zero B is coming along well. We've had her under power. She has not been in free flight yet. And then I have another successor vehicle that will be coming up at some point in the near future. I don't have a timetable for it yet. And then there's a couple of other interesting programs that are further down, and I'll talk about them closer to when they're actually flying. So, how's that? Was that good enough?
Nice dance.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, it's always great to see the hardware flying, so I'm excited to see it myself. One last question here, and I'll kind of group them together, which is obviously there's keeping the I think you guys have talked about how to keep your employees motivated with the uncertainty, with the real transparency and stuff that you guys talked about. How do you keep your investors motivated, and what kind of returns are they and timelines do you guys see in the investor community? And they may be different for both, different timelines for both of your models.
And within our Silicon Valley model, there are different flavors of investors at every stage. So people that like early high-risk investment are coming in on what are called seed rounds or angel rounds, or Series A type. And Series B that we went through last year is a little bit more serious. It's not just there are not just $100,000 checks, but there might be a $1 million check or $2 million check or two in there, and that gets to be some serious diligence, and you have to show me how this is going to be done. In what's usually the senior round or the C round of the company that we're in now, it is pretty serious. And it's a different type of investor. You might get into a VC that are handling other people's money that they are responsible for. So, in this process, it's very much making stone soup. In my case, maybe moon rock soup. And every investor that comes in has a little bit to offer, not just capital, but advice. And every partner we have has a little bit to offer. And every customer we have has a little bit to offer. And it's tasting a little better these days. So our ability to raise capital now, just by the performance, we've raised more capital in the last 4 months than we did in the first 4 years. So there's a knee of the curve, that knock on glass continues well. Perform, don't overpromise, don't underpromise. Fuel the company with the right level of fuel. It's like a rocket. Right level of fuel, right velocity, second stage, third stage, and you have to be able to have enough capital to reach escape velocity, which is sustainability. Otherwise, you get going in the wrong direction.
And for us, the best way to keep our investors happy is to stop asking them for money. So when we're able to stand up and take care of payroll and all the rest of that on our own, that definitely helps. When I say, hey, I need a short-term loan and I actually pay it back, those are things that encourage an awful lot of enthusiasm from the investors and hopefully demonstrates our ability to find value. And then in the future, the next investor will be able to see, yes, we can actually do what we said we were going to do.
So with that, I think our time is up.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Jason.
everyone.
Thank you.